everybody. Thank you for being here. Does everyone have a source sheet? You have a source sheet. Okay, great. So what the idea of this three-part class is really to look at the mitzvah of Shmita in the context of economic justice. And what I really want to start off, I'm going to teach the first and the third session, and Gloria Schneider is going to teach next week. And today what we're going to do is really focus on the psukim that talk about Shemitah. There are three main places in the Torah that talk about Shemitah. In these three places, the Torah deals with Shemitah in very different ways. So we're going to take a look at really in-depth look at these places. What is the Torah saying in each of the places in which it talks about Shemitah? And we're going to come to some kind of conclusions, and then in the end, what we're going to do is look at a couple of later sources which talk about what are the big ideas behind Shemitah. That's what we're going to do today. Next week, Gloria is going to help us put this into an economic perspective, and then the third week, we're going to look at the mitzvah of Yovel, which is very much connected to the mitzvah of Shemitah, but is worth dealing with separately. So that's kind of the three pieces of this. To start off, I think Shemitah is probably one of the best and most overlooked mitzvot in the Torah in terms of what it is really trying to get at, and what the Torah is really, what the agenda that the Torah is trying to promote is. And so I think it's amazing actually to just read the psukim and take them at face value and understand what the psukim of Shemitah are trying to say. If I asked you, even before we get to the psukim, what's the purpose of Shemitah? What's Shemitah for? Just throw something out. What would you throw out?
To give the land a rest.
To give the land a rest.
To give people a chance to have their debts excused.
Okay, so to give the land a rest, to give people a chance to have their debts excused. So those are two very different ideas, right?
Yeah.
Good. Okay, anything else?
As an appreciation, a way of appreciating all the bounty that God gives us on a regular basis.
Okay, so appreciation. You need to stop and kind of say it's a way of saying thank you. Good. Okay.
Discipline.
Which is another idea.
Discipline.
Discipline. Good. What do you mean by discipline?
To discipline yourselves like to save. To save, put away for the Shemitah year. Anything that you can. Store up grain.
Interesting. So realizing that you can't use all your resources all the time whenever you want them, you need to make sure that you are going to actually have enough, and that almost personality development you're saying.
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Also to show that the world belongs to God and not to man.
Mm-hmm.
And also in terms of the freeing of the slaves, the cable slaves, that also they're not our possessions.
Good.
But they belong
Okay,
to
great. So the world belongs to God, and slaves and the freeing of slaves, that we don't own slaves. Okay, good. So those are all ideas actually that you can find in the psukim, and I want to take a look at what are we really getting at Shemitah. You know, is it everything? What are the main ideas that the psukim are trying to tell us about Shemitah? So the first place in the Torah in which Shemitah appears is in Sefer Shmot. And I want to just read through. If someone wants to read, you can read either in the English or in the Hebrew. We're going to read through it and talk about what we see here. Volunteer?
I'll read English.
Go for it.
Thou shalt not utter a false report. Put not thy hand with the wicked to be an unrighteous witness. Thou shalt not follow a multitude to do evil, neither shalt thou bear witness in a cause to turn aside after a multitude to pervert justice. Neither shalt thou favor a poor man in his cause. If thou meet thine enemy's ox or his ass going astray, thou shalt surely bring it back to him again. If thou see the ass of him that hateth thee lying under its burden, thou shalt forbear to pass by him. Thou shalt surely release it with him. Thou shalt not wrest the judgment of thy poor in his cause. Keep thee far from a false matter, and the innocent and righteous slay thou not. for I will not justify the wicked. And thou shalt take no gift, for a gift blindeth them that have sight, and perverteth the words of the righteous. And a stranger shalt thou not oppress, for ye know the heart of a stranger, seeing ye were strangers in the land of Egypt.
Okay, so let's actually stop right there, because the next pasuk is where it gets into Shmita. So if we just read those psukim, what's the context? What types of things are we discussing here in Shmot Perek Chaf Gimel?
Treatment of the poor.
Treatment of the poor. Good. Treatment of the poor. It's not only treatment of the poor. What else is it?
The way to behave.
The way to behave in what particular way?
The right way.
The right way.
As opposed to doing whatever nasty thing you feel like.
Okay, so we're talking here really about mitzvot that are connected to social justice. This is very much a social justice context, right? We're saying here, if you see somebody's lost animal, don't just walk by, you need to return it to them. If you see the animal of your enemy, right, flailing under a burden, don't pretend that you don't see it. You need to turn back and go and help it.
Right.
Okay? But don't go so far as to, in judgment, favor the poor. Judgment, right, is judgment, and helping people is helping people. And so there's these kind of two categories here. But this is very much a social justice context in Shmot Perek Chaf Gimel, Parshat Mishpatim. What do we have in Pasuk Tet? And I'm going to take over and read in the Hebrew here. The ger lo tilchatz, right? This you read already, but I want to. It's worth going back to. Right? Don't oppress the stranger. Who's the stranger in the Torah? When the Torah says ger, who are we talking about? It's actually not a convert. When the Torah talks about ger, the Torah doesn't mean a convert. The Torah means somebody who lives in your area who's not of you, right? So it is a non-Jew who lives among you, okay? Don't oppress them. Why? Because you of all people should know how Gerim feel. And then in Pasuk Yud, V'sheish shanim tizra et artzacha, and I think the and is important because the and there connects the idea of Shmita to this idea of don't oppress the stranger, right? And for 6 years you should plant your land, v'asafta et tfuata, and collect your produce, v'ashvi'it tishmitena unitashta. And on the 7th year, you should let it rest and abandon it, v'achlu evyonei amecha, so that the poor people should be able to eat. V'yitram tochal chayot hasadeh. And anything that is extra, the animals can eat. Kain taseh lecharmecha lezeitecha, you should do that also in your vineyard, and with your olives. Let's stop there, actually, because then we get into Shabbat. What's the purpose of Shemitah here? What's it about? It's very clear. It's about one thing here. What's it about?
Feeding the poor.
Feeding the poor. Shemitah is completely about feeding the poor, right? So leave your land fallow so that what?
The poor people.
So that the poor people can eat, okay? Which is very much connected to Pasuk Tet, which is about ger lo tilchatz, which is about do not oppress the stranger. What are we talking about here? We're talking about the idea of taking care of people in society who need to be taken care of. Okay.
That's a great
Very-
question.
yes.
Does that mean the Jewish poor too can eat from the fields during Shemitah? No.
Well, take a look at what the pasuk says. The pasuk actually says the Jewish poor. V'chlu evyonei amecha. Right.
Okay.
The Jewish poor should come and eat. Okay. So it's interesting,
Yes.
right? Before we were talking about the ger, and now we're
Yeah.
actually talking about, right, people amongst you who are poor.
Okay, of thy people, right? You can
So
say
leave your land so that poor people can eat. Let's read the next pasuk, okay? Sheshet yamim taseh ma'asecha. For 6 days, this is somewhat familiar to us, right? 6 days you should do what you need to do. Uviyom hashvi tishbot. And on the 7th day you should rest. Why? Why do we keep Shabbat? This is amazing.
It says
L'ma'an yanuach shorcha v'chamorecha v'yinafesh ben amatecha v'hager. Why do we keep Shabbat?
So your animals may rest too.
So your animals and
Your slaves.
your animals, your slaves, and
the
the stranger
Yeah,
could rest.
Jews,
In other words, the
yeah.
whole reason we keep Shabbat is so that I need to give my workers, including my animals, a day off. Because if I don't have the commandment to rest, I'm never going to let the people, I'm not going to work and they rest, right? So I have to rest in order to allow for them to rest. Okay, we actually have the same thing in Sefer Dvarim, where Sefer Dvarim talks about when it repeats the Aseret HaDibrot, it talks about the purpose of Shabbat. The whole purpose of Shabbat here and in Sefer Dvarim is actually to let slaves rest, which is a fascinating idea and not normally how we tend to think about Shabbat, right? You need a day. It is a prescribed vacation day. That's what Shabbat is, okay? Because otherwise you are not going to let your slaves rest. Now, if you take a look here, so what do we have? We have the idea of Shemitah connected with the idea of Shabbat. Both Shemitah and Shabbat are completely about social justice. And there's a literary envelope here of the ger, right? Pasuk Tet, we introduce this idea really with ger lo tilchat, don't oppress the stranger. And the last word, right, in Pasuk Yud Bet, at the end of this is V'nafesh ben amatecha v'hager. Okay? And it's all, there's this literary envelope of do not oppress the stranger. And that's really here the idea of Shemitah as presented in Sefer Shmot. And what we really have to ask ourselves is if the idea behind Shemitah is helping the poor, if I'm a poor person, how does it actually help me to have access to someone's land once every 7 years? How does that help me? Right? I need help all the time here. And what are we saying here? This is not about loans here. This is about what can I do? I have access to somebody's field. So how does it actually help? Great, that year it's really good for me. But what about the other 6?
And maybe not, because if it's fallow, then there's nothing there.
Well, the assumption is that there is, right, and
Enough
certainly at
to
the
eat.
beginning, that there is enough to eat, right? And Sefer Vayikra, which we'll see, but it talks about, how are you going to eat in the 7th year? And it says Hashem will give enough food in the 6th year that it will last for the 7th, and actually if it's Yovel, it will last for 3 years. But at any rate, assuming that there is food to eat, but practically you're 100% correct, how does that help me?
Yeah, well, during the other 6 years, it's assumed you will share what you have with your slaves because you have enough. On the 7th year, you might keep them hungry because you're worried about what you're going to feed your family. So your bad nature may come out then. We're not worried about the slaves during the 6 years. They're taken care of.
Good. Okay.
Or the
So maybe it's a special worry on the 7th year.
Yeah.
Okay. But only because on the 7th year you may actually not provide for
Right.
your slave. But what's interesting about Sefer Shmot, and challenge that a little bit, is that it seems to be presented as not let the land rest and take care of the poor people because the land is resting, but let the land rest in order that the poor people can eat. In other words, if it wasn't for the poor people, maybe we wouldn't have this whole idea of Shemitah to begin with. And so I think there's a very interesting idea here, which is, first of all, this is not the only halacha in the Torah that talks about how to support the poor. Right? We have tzedakah, we have lots of things, we have loaning without interest, and so it is not that the only time we ever take care of poor people is once every 7 years during the Shemitah year. But I do think here there's a fundamental idea here, I think, that the Torah is trying to convey, which is what actually happens during the 7th year. It basically says, if you take a look back at the psukim, right, it says, V'achlu et yonei amecha, right? You are going into the land, and who else is going into your field to collect? The poor people are going into the field to collect. You're not giving to them. So it's a very different idea than the idea of tzedakah, right? When I give somebody tzedakah, that puts me in a particular position, right? I am now the giver, and that person is now the taker, right? Shemitah is not that. Shemitah is an equalizer. What does Shemitah year do? First of all, right, it could be anonymous, although you can look at it both ways. It could be anonymous, that person just coming into the field and taking, but it's also, I could be standing in my field and picking next to a poor person I don't know, next to somebody who is otherwise my worker, Okay? And I'm not giving to them. I'm no longer a giver and they're no longer a taker. Because everything is hefker, everything is ownerless. Okay? So what Shmita does is, it's not just about, okay, once every 7 years people have something to eat. But once every 7 years we kind of erase these boundaries in society that we're used to having, and we say everybody is actually equal. We don't have power relationships. Nobody can actually feel superior to anyone else in this year, which is something that you would think would carry through to other years. And that, I think, is also, we have a microcosm of that on Shabbat, right? That once every 7 days, I rest, and my servants rest, and my animals rest. Okay? And then there's no superiority there once every 7 days. And so Shemitah is a much more global expression of that idea. Okay, and I think that's really what's going on here in Sefer Shemot. What's very interesting about Sefer Shemot is that God is completely missing, right? There's no mention here of, right, Shabbat, right? When you think about Shabbat, the first thing you think about is God, right? We rest because, right, God created the world, and we rest because God rested on the 7th day. Here, there's no mention of God at all here, right? In this whole parasha, it's all about my responsibility as a landowner. Okay? Once every 7 years, I have to make a hefker, I have to let poor people eat. And that's really the focus here of Sefer Shemot. Okay? Sefer Vayikra, which we're going to do now, is entirely different. And here's what it says in Sefer Vayikra. I'm going to read. And just notice, as we read through it, I can read and translate at the same time, but as we read through it, notice the difference in how it's presented. V'daber Hashem Moshe behar Sinai lemor, daber el bnei Yisrael, v'amart alehem, ki tavohu el haaretz asher ani notin lachem, v'shavta haaretz Shabbat laHashem. When you come into the land, you should let the land rest a Shabbat to God. Sheish shanim tizra sadecha, v'sheish shanim tizmor karmecha, v'asafta et tfuata. For 6 years you can work the land and gather in its produce. Uvashana hashvi Shabbat Shabbaton yela aretz Shabbat laHashem. And the 7th year is a great Shabbaton, and it is a Shabbat for the land, and it is a Shabbat for God. Sarcha lo tizra v'chamer kacha lo tizmor. Right? Don't plant, don't collect from your vineyard. Et safich kirtzecha lo tiktzor ve'invei mizirecha lo tivtzor. Do not collect what has just grown in your field. Shnat Shabbaton yihiyeh la'aretz. It is a year of
Rest.
V'haita Shabbat ha'aretz lachem la'achla. And the produce of this Shabbat of the land can be for you. Ula'avdecha v'la'amatecha, and for your servants. V'lischircha u'letoshavecha, and for the people who work for you, live amongst you, hagarim imach. V'liventecha v'lechaya asher ba'aretzecha, and for your animals, tieh kol tzvuata le'achol. Okay, all of should be all of your produce to eat. Okay, so first of all, what's Shemitah called here? Many times.
Shabbaton.
Okay, Shabbat, Shabbaton, and Shabbat Lashem. Okay, how many times is the word Shabbat mentioned here? Take a wild guess.
7?
Yeah, 7. Okay, it's mentioned 7 times, which is just kind of nice. What does it mean that Shemitah is a Shabbat Lashem? What does it mean?
But is
the
it like a
business of the rest
mitzvah?
for God,
Yeah,
right?
because we're commanded to rest. We're resting. It's a mitzvah. That's all. It's not. We wouldn't do it ourselves.
Okay, so you're saying rest for God, rest because God said so.
Yes, because it's demanded of you.
Okay, rest because it's demanded of you. Good. Anyone else?
Rest because God did.
Rest because God did. Okay, good. Take a look. I want to. Yeah, go ahead.
Is it to rest and trust God? That's in parentheses because He will have to take care of you then.
Okay, so it's a rest of God, and you're adding to it. You're going to need
have
God's
to
help
trust Him,
in here.
right.
Mhm, good. Okay, I want to take a look very carefully at a couple of psukim here. I want to go back for a minute to Pasuk Gimel, okay? And Pasuk Gimel, we're going to compare it to what we saw in Sefer Shmot. So what does it say in Pasuk Gimel? Sheish shanim tizra sadecha, v'sheish shanim tizmor karmecha, v'asafta et tfuata. Right? For 6 years, you should plant, right? And if you flip back a little bit to Sefer Shmot, you have almost the same pasuk in Pasuk Yud, right? It says, Sheish shanim tizra artzecha v'asafta et tfuata, right? You should plant for 6 years and then collect.
Right.
And what does it say in Shmot? Plant for 6 years, and on the 7th year, what do? You should let the land rest so that
Yeah,
poor people can eat. What does it say here? Right? 6 years you should plant and collect, and on the 7th year,
Says that you can eat.
the land is resting. So there's a big difference in subject here, right? In Sefer Shmot, who's the subject?
Poor.
Well, you're the subject, right? And you have to, people, really, right? Either you as the landowner or the poor person. And in Sefer Vayikra, the subject now has switched to Shabbat Shabbaton Yeh La'aretz, right? The land needs to rest. A Shabbat to Hashem.
It also,
Which is, yeah, go ahead.
it also says Shabbat Haaretz Lachem, that it's for you, a Shabbat for you too.
Good.
Yeah.
100%, right? It's not to the exclusion of it is, right? But even lachem, v'haita Shabbat haaretz, the resting of the land is also for you, right?
Do you think, does that imply that you can eat from the sadeh too, or no?
So you're allowed to eat. Yes, you are allowed to. You're not allowed to plant, but you're allowed to eat what grows by itself.
I thought that was supposed to be all for the poor people.
Okay, so even if you take a look here, right? If you take a look in even in Shmot, right? You are in Shmot. It says, right? Sheishanim tizrat artecha v'asafta tzuata. In Shmot, it doesn't explicitly say that you're allowed to eat, also, but it doesn't say that you can't eat. Okay. And here it says, you're 100% right that here, who's missing from here? Right? God is all over the place here, but who's missing? The poor person isn't explicitly mentioned. Okay? So what does it mean really?
But
Go ahead.
actually it says that the poor people will eat and what they leave behind will be for the animals.
In Vayikra.
In Shmot.
I'm sorry, in Shmot it mentions the poor person. Vayikra it doesn't. We're back to Vayikra now. So in
It doesn't.
Vayikra,
Yeah.
right, which is what we just read, it doesn't say anything at all about the poor person. Right? What does it say in Vayikra? In Vayikra it says, right, it's a Shabbat of the land, okay? And you can eat it, and who else can eat it?
Avdecha,
Avdecha, amantecha, yeah, but you don't have this focus at all. But the people who work for you can eat it, right? And your animals can eat it, but you don't have a focus
And
at
the
all on,
strangers.
right?
Poor people.
On the poor people specifically. And it's not presented as the whole idea behind Shemitah is to feed the poor. What's the whole idea behind Shemitah here? Shabbat haaretz,
He'll rest
Shabbat
the
l'Hashem.
land.
So you could say, well, maybe it's that the land needs to rest. And then the question becomes, well, why does the land need to rest? You could say the land needs to rest because it's good for the land. You could say the land needs to rest because, and I think there's so many mentions of the word God here, because what's really going on here is why does the land need to rest? Because we need to realize that the land doesn't belong to us. Okay? So it's less about I need to give poor people a chance to access my land, and more here, and I don't think these are contradictory ideas, and I'll get to that in a minute, but more here about Shemitah is presented in Sefer Vayikra as I need to realize that the land belongs to God. Okay? And if it belongs to God, that means it does not belong to me. That means that anybody can come and take from the land, right? Shemitah here is very global, right? Anybody can come and take. It's not just about the poor person. So when we learned Sefer, when we took a look at it in Sefer Shmot, right, it was directly connected to the idea of Shabbat, right? Shemitah in Sefer Shmot was about letting our slaves, letting the poor person eat, and Shabbat in Sefer Shmot here, right, was about letting our slaves rest. Here we don't have a direct connection to Shabbat and Sefer Vayikra, but the language of Shmita really directly parallels the language of Shabbat. So I want to take a look. If you flip the page, there's a nifty little chart. And what I want to take a look at is, and this is Rav Rimon, if anyone's seen, has an excellent book about Shmita, and he really points to this this parallel, which I think is fascinating. And if you take a look, so Shmot Perek Chaf is where Shabbat is presented in the Aseret HaDibrot. And take a look at the parallel language between Shabbat in the Aseret HaDibrot and Shemitah in what we just saw in Vayikra, right? So in Shabbat, what does it say? Sheshi Yamim Tavod, for 6 days you work. What does it say in Shemitah? For 6 years you work the land. In Shmot, Vasita Kol Melachtecha, do all your work in 6 days. And in Shemitah it says, and go ahead, right? Shemitah, go ahead and collect all of your produce. Both Shabbat and Shemitah are called Shabbat LaHashem. In Shmot, you're not allowed to do work on Shabbat. In Vayikra, on Shemitah, you're not allowed to work your land. Who? Right? Atav, Vincha, Vitecha, Avdecha, Vamatecha. We have a similar kind of list of people, including your Behema and including your Ger. And then we end with, in the last box here, Ki Sheish Yamim Aseh Hashem et Hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz. What's the idea, the driving idea behind Shabbat? Because God created the world in 6 days and then rested, so I need to rest. And Vayikra, at the very end of this passage, because it talks about Shemitah and then it talks about Yovel, the very end, we'll get to it when we talk about Yovel in 2 weeks, it says Kili Kol Haaretz, because all the land belongs to God. Two very parallel ideas. So, and the language is almost the same. What's the idea here? On Shemitah, like Shabbat, right, we rest from work because it's a time that we realize that God created the world. And there's one more parallel that's really interesting, which is between this section in Vayikra and Breshit Perek Aleph, which is Adam and Chava in Gan Eden. Okay? So take a look at this, right? In Breshit, what do we say? V'yomer Elokim, Hine natati lachem ekol esev zorei zara, asher al pnei kol haaretz, that kol ha'etz asher bo pri'et zorei zara, lachem yeh la'achla. What does God say? God says, here, Adam, Chava, here's all of the land for you. L'kol chayat haaretz, l'kol of hashamayim, l'kol rameis haaretz, asher bo nefesh chayat, ekol yarek esev la'achla. I have given you the whole land to eat. And what does Hashem say to us, right, during Shemitah, using somewhat similar language? Here you go. On the Shemitah year, you are not planting the land, but the land, God's kind of giving us to the land, right? What's Shabbat Haaretz, the produce of the Shemitah year, is ours, all of ours together, right? And you see the parallels in the language. What's this parallel really doing? And I think this taken together with the Shabbat, it's bringing us back to Gan Eden, right? What does that mean? It's bringing us back to Gan Eden. It's bringing us back to a state in which God provided things for us, okay? God provided things for us. And what does Shemitah do? It says, we're sojourners here, right? The land doesn't really belong to us. We recognize God created the world, and God gives us gifts. Okay, so we have two very different ideas presented in Sefer Shmot and in Sefer Vayikra. Sefer Shmot, Shemitah is really about social justice and support of the poor. Sefer Vayikra, Shemitah is more global than that. Shemitah is about, I recognize that God created the world and that it doesn't belong to, my land doesn't really belong to me. One is much more economic, one is much more theological. I don't think those two ideas are contradictory in any way. I think they work hand in hand with each other. How so, right? If I recognize that the land doesn't belong to me, what does that do? That then gives me a responsibility to
Share it.
share it. to share it, okay, and to help others, right? So the focus of Vayikra is different than the focus of Sefer Dvarim, but the two ideas actually work very well together, okay? One more section in the Torah where it talks about Shemitah, and that is in Sefer Dvarim, and this is where we get into the issue of Shemitah canceling loans, right? Until now, we've seen what Chazal calls Shmitat Karka, which is the rest of the land. And now in Sefer Dvarim, we have what Chazal calls Shmitat Ksafim, which is the cancellation of debts. Okay, so let's read. Miketz Sheva Shanim Taseh Shmita. So, at the end of 7 years, you should make a cancellation, a Shemitah. What should you do? V'zeh dvar ha-Shemitah. Here's what you should do. Shmot kol ba'al mashe yado asher yashev b're'ehu. You should cancel all debts which are owed from one person to another. Lo yigosh et re'ehu ve'et achiv ki kara Shemitah laHashem. You should not collect from somebody because a Shemitah has been declared to God. Ve'et hanachri tigosh. It's very interesting here. This is very B'nai Yisrael focused. I bolded kind of all the times that it says Achicha here, right? Who are debts canceled for in Shemitah? Jews. You cancel debts for Jews, you don't cancel debts for non-Jews. Okay, and we'll talk about that in a second. Right? We don't want any poor people amongst you. Rak im shamoa tishma b'kol Hashem Elokecha lishmor לעשות את כל מצווה הזאת אשר אנוכי מצווך היום. כי השם אלוקיך בירך כאשר דיבר לך, ועבדת גויים רבים, ואתה לא תעבוד, ומשלת בגויים רבים, ובך לא ימשולו. Okay? God, there should not be poor people amongst you. God has blessed you, and you will be able to rule over nations. However, if it does so happen that you do have a poor person amongst you, כי יהיה בך אביון מאחד אחיך, באחד שעריך בארצך, אשר השם אלוקיך נותן לך, לא תאמץ אל לבבך ולא תקפוץ את ידך מאחיך האביון. Do not neglect to help that poor person. כי פתוח תפתח את ידך לו ותביטנו די מחסרו שיחסר לו. You need to provide that poor person with what he needs. הישמר לך, פן יהיה דבר עם לבבך בליעה לאמור. קרבה שנת השבע שנת השמיטה. I love this pasuk because this pasuk is basically saying, I know what you're going to think. You're going to think that the 7th year is approaching, and therefore I'm not going to lend, because what's going to happen? I'm never going to get it back. And you're going to look askance, right? On your brother, the poor person, right? Keep saying your brother, your brother, your brother. You're not going to give to him. And he's going to call out to God, and you're going to be the sinner. Right? You should give him, and not only should you give him, but don't give him with a bad heart. Why did God bless you? God blessed you so that you could help out other people. Because there are always going to be poor people. Okay? Therefore, God blessed you in order that you need to help the poor. Okay, very clearly here, the focus is on Shmitat Ksafim, cancellation of debts, helping poor people. Why does it cancel debts for Jews and not for non-Jews? Right? We wouldn't even maybe ask the question, except for that the focus of, right, if we looked at Sefer Shmot was all about helping the ger, helping the stranger, right? It wasn't so focused on just B'nai Yisrael, and this is very much focused on B'nai Yisrael. I think it probably has to do with the fact that what the Torah is asking here is something you do for your family, right? This is huge. This is basically saying, like, lend somebody money and don't get it back. That's a big deal.
It's huge.
Okay? It's huge. And so I don't think this is, I think this is saying like, okay, achicha, this is how you should treat your family. And that it's a demand that is maybe even too great, right? You can open your field to everybody, right? But if we're talking about cancellation of a debt, maybe it is unrealistic to say that you do that for everybody. Maybe that's something that you do just for your family. So what's the connection really between this section and what we saw in Shmot and what we saw in Vayikra? And I think it's important to keep in mind the context, like the agricultural context of Shemitah, okay? If you are a farmer and you're taking out a loan, why are you taking out a loan?
Buy seeds.
To buy seed. You're taking out a loan to buy seed. Okay, when are you going to pay back that loan?
When the crop comes in.
When your crop is harvested. Can you possibly pay back a loan in Shemitah? No.
No,
Why?
not harvested.
Because it's not, and it's not yours. Okay? So you can't, meaning, you can almost look at Sefer Dvarim as it's not separate. It's a natural consequence of a halacha that tells you that you need to leave your land fallow. Okay? We need to cancel debts, right? Because people aren't lending money to, we're not talking about a society in which people are borrowing money to start businesses. People, what's your business? Your farm. Okay, so people are borrowing money because they need to buy seed and have a crop. And you're never going to be able to pay it back in a Shemitah year. Okay? So you can't have Shemitah Karka without having Shemitah Ksafim. It just wouldn't work. Right? So I think it's an interesting way to understand it. And again, Sefer Dvarim here is not contradicting at all what we saw in Shmot and Vayikra. It's simply adding on another aspect that really would make Shemitah work.
I'll just
Question?
answer that. Well, I'm going to answer it just because what you're saying might imply if they can't pay back the loan the 7th year, let's just postpone the loan.
Right.
Take a holiday on repayment and postpone to next year. But to tie into Shmita and the equalization piece, it really lets people start fresh, which takes it to a different level.
100%. And that really, I think, is, if you look at all these, take a step back, and yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, but at least I don't usually think of people being poor if they own land and they're farmers. It's the poor people who don't have land who are the poor and you have to lend to. And if
Good.
because
Okay.
they're going to buy food or they're going to need whatever it is they need the money for.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so it actually is 100%. So you actually have both of those. Okay, and here you're gonna one of the assumption here, I think, is that we are talking here about a poor person who is a landowner. In Vayikra, we're going to talk about this in 2 weeks. It talks about what actually makes somebody really poor and really default on their debt is when you're a farmer and that's where we get into the purpose of Yovel. You're a farmer and you take out a loan, and you take out a loan to plant your crop, and then you have a crop failure, and then what happens? Then you have to sell part of your land, and then what happens after that? You lose your land, and then you become an indentured servant on someone else's land. So we do talk, there's stages of poverty in the Torah, right? And that's kind of where we end up. That's not where we are here, but this still is somebody who has a loan and can't pay back a loan. What's Shemitah really as an economic system? If we take all these three pieces, the Shmot and Vayikra and Dvarim together, does the Torah support land ownership? 100% Torah supports land ownership, right? The Torah is basically saying, you own land. But the Torah is also believing that we should not have such a huge gap between the rich and the poor. So you can look at Shemitah as kind of every 7 years, we have an equalizer, right? Every 7 years you have the poor people and the rich people out in the field together, where one person isn't in a power position over another. Everyone's in the field together. And every 7 years, we give people the opportunity, as Gloria said, to get back on their feet, right? So you no longer owe money to somebody. So it's almost it's like a once every 7 year adjustment, which helps narrow the gap between rich and poor. It's like a 6-to-1 capitalism-socialism ratio a little bit, is one way to look at it, in very broad strokes, right? Torah's not socialist, it is capitalist, but is capitalist with adding elements into the system that help erase gaps between rich and poor, which I think is really interesting. And I think if you look at all three of these sections, they all work really nicely together around that basic idea. I want to spend a couple minutes just looking at some sources that talk about the purpose of Shemitah. So what we saw just now was really just focusing on the three main sections in the Torah. And what we're going to do now is just look at some opinions two opinions of Rishonim who talk about what the purpose of Shemitah is. And you will see this really supported in the psukim that we saw. So the first is the Rambam from the Moreh Nevuchim. Somebody want to read the Rambam?
In English?
In English. It was written in Arabic, so I needed to.
Okay. The entire mitzvah of Shemitah is saturated with compassion and clemency for all people. As it is written, and the destitute of your nation shall eat, and the animal of the field shall eat the remainder.
Okay, so there we have it, right? The Rambam says first reason for Shemitah is compassion and clemency for all people.
Yeah.
And that's really the social justice theme of Shemitah that we've been talking about until now. Okay. And then he has a very interesting and somewhat controversial second reason for Shemitah. Go ahead.
Okay. Another reason for Shemitah is so that the yield will increase, because the soil will become strengthened during the year that it rests.
Okay, so the Rambam says, well, it's good for the land. Okay, and lots of people disagree with the Rambam and say, no, that's not true. If that's true, then why is Shemitah only a mitzvah in Eretz Yisrael? It's not a mitzvah outside of Eretz Yisrael. Why do we then have Yovel on top of it, and the land is resting for more than 1 year sometimes? But it is interesting that the Rambam throws that out as an idea.
But in agriculture, in modern society, they definitely rest fields. There's crop rotation, and then there's resting, planting nothing. So it's
right. It is
good for the land.
Right. It is entirely possible that there is some truth to what is said, and that if you wanted to read this back in the Psukim, the place you would read this back into is Sefer Vayikra, where it talks about the land. Right. Let the land rest for Shabbat LaHashem. Okay. Sefer Chinuch. Sefer Chinuch was written anonymously. We're not exactly sure who wrote it, in 13th century Spain. And what's interesting about the Sefer Chinuch is it goes through all 613 mitzvot. And with each mitzvah, in addition to summarizing the main idea, summarizing the main sort of practical things that you would need to know about the mitzvah, the author of Sefer Chinuch for each mitzvah also says, Mishor Sheha mitzvah. This is the purpose of a mitzvah. Okay, so here's what he has to say about Shemitah. He says three things. I'll read. Mishorshei mitzvah, I'll translate as I go along. Likboa bilibeinu, v'litzayer tziyur chazak b'machshavteinu, inyan chidush ha'olam ki sheshe amim asa Hashem et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz. He basically says the whole idea behind Shemitah is zecher le'briat ha'olam. We need to remember that God created the world, and this is very similar to what we saw in Vayikra. When God didn't create anything on the seventh day, says that God rested. Right? In order to erase any doubt that God created the world, right? We need to know that God created the world. What do we need to do? We have 2 cycles of time that attest to that. One is the daily cycle, and the other is the yearly cycle. Okay? And then just if you go to the second to last line, we'll skip a little bit. The land doesn't produce the food on its own. Why do you have to relinquish ownership over land? To realize that God owns it. You really don't own it, okay? And it's zecher, in that sense, it's zecher to the fact that God created the world. Okay, we saw that in Vayikra. He adds 2 other things. The Ode. Yesh to'el nimtza b'davar likno bazeh midat havatranut. It's good for personality development. How is Shemitah good for personality development? It creates in us it helps us develop the element of giving up, being mevater on something, being able to relinquish things. How do you really give? you really learn to give by giving to people without expecting anything in return, and that's what Shmita is. So it's good for your personality in that sense. And then he says it's good in another way. That it helps us with our emunah. It helps us with our faith in God. How does it help us with our faith in God? Because I'm not planting. I need to rely on the fact that God is going to provide enough food for me. Okay, so these are the three ideas that the Baal Sefer HaChinuch sees in Shmita. I want to end with a really beautiful passage by Rav Kook. Rav Kook wrote a very interesting and beautiful book called Shabbat Haaretz, which he wrote as he was dealing with modern day Israel and how you keep Shemitah in the modern times in Israel. And he wrote an introduction to his book, which is really all about what the purpose of Shemitah is. And here is what he has to say, quite condensed. The quality of life can only be improved through the affording of a breathing space from the bustle of everyday affairs. The individual recovers from the influence of the mundane at frequent intervals every Sabbath day. What the Sabbath achieves regarding the individual, the Shmita achieves with regard to the nation as a whole. I like that line. The nation has a special need of expressing from time to time the revelation of its own divine light at its fullest brightness, not suppressed by the cares and toil of everyday life. Sanctity is not profaned by the exercise of private acquisitiveness over this year's produce, and the covetousness of wealth stirred up by commerce is forgotten. Okay? So he's saying a couple of different things here, right? One, he's saying a Shemitah is kind of a break from technology, a little bit, if you could put it in a modern context a little, right? What does Shmita do? Shmita, it's a break. It's a break from work. When you're working your lands all the time, right? Everything becomes mundane. And so Shmita is like a global Shabbat, right? You stop, you rest. What does that allow you to do? It adds sanctity into your life. And what does that do? Sanctity is not profaned by the exercise. Shmita is the idea of shmo, right? Saying if you realize that you're resting and you're not involved in all this mundane, right? What does that do? That means that you're not obsessed with ownership, right? If you're not obsessed with ownership, what does that do? Right? Eventually, it doesn't spell it out here, but if you're not obsessed with ownership, that leaves room for you to help other people. Okay? And I think it's a really beautiful idea. I think all of these three sections in the Torah really work beautifully together. Right? What's Shemitah about? I realize that the land is not mine. The land belongs to God, and therefore, we help erase boundaries in society. Right? We're all children of God, and I help the poor people. And that's really, I think what's the idea behind Shmita here. So we're going to end with that. And next week, Gloria is going to put this in an economic context for us. And then we're going to learn a little bit about Yovel. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.